Mark Twain warned us over a century ago, if you don't read the newspaper, you are uninformed. If you do read the newspaper, you are misinformed. Of course, Mr. Twain had no other media than newspapers at his fingertips to glean information, opinion, and, more importantly, material for his witticisms. The 21st century's chaotic explosion of information from broadcast radio and television, cable TV, satellite radio and TV, the Internet, and many other voices and outlets would have given Twain an ocean of material to use to skewer his targets with his satire. Without question, however, he would have had a blog. And I'm sure it would have been one of the most popular blogs on the Internet. If he were alive today, perhaps his cheerful disdain for newspapers would have led him and his readers to bypass the papers altogether. And that's a point at the heart of today's order. If consumers and content providers want to bypass the media technologies of yesteryear in favor of new media, they can. And they are. In fact, the evidence in the record tells us that if you are under 30, you are probably not reading a traditional newspaper or tuning into your local broadcasters. You may never do so, at least not in the way that the over 30 crowd does, like those of us up here. It is precisely this type of paradigm shift that Congress and the courts have charged the Commission with weighing heavily as we revise our media ownership rules. But before I delve into the substance of today's order, let's take a moment to examine how we got here. The current proceeding began at my very first open meeting as a commissioner 18 months ago. This proceeding has been unprecedented in scope and thoroughness. We gathered and reviewed over 130,000 initial and reply comments and extended the comment deadline once. We released a second further notice in response to concerns that our initial notice was not specific enough regarding proposals to increase minority and female ownership of stations. We gathered and reviewed even more comments and replies in response to the second notice. We traveled across our great nation to hear directly from the American people during 6 field hearings on ownership in Los Angeles and El Segundo, Nashville, Harrisburg, Tampa-St. Pete, Chicago, and Seattle. We held 2 additional hearings on localism in Portland, Maine, and here in our nation's capital. In those hearings, we've heard from 115 expert panelists on the state of ownership in those markets, and we've stayed late into the night and frequently early into the next morning to hear from concerned citizens who signed up to speak, and I want to thank all of those who turned out to express their views. We also commissioned and released for public comment 10 economic studies by respected economists from academia and elsewhere. These studies examine ownership structure and its effect on the quantity and quality of news and other programming on radio, TV, and in newspapers, on minority and female ownership in media enterprises, on the effects of cross-ownership on local content and political slant, and on vertical integration and the market for broadcast programming. We received and reviewed scores more comments and replies in response. Some commenters did not like the studies, and their critiques are part of the record. So during my entire term as a commissioner, we have been reviewing this matter. But our review did not begin last year. The previous round began in 2002. At that time, the Commission received thousands of formal comments and millions of informal comments. The Commission held 4 localism hearings across the country to gather additional evidence. The FCC also produced 12 media ownership working group studies. We all know that the 2002 review ended badly for the Commission, with both the legislative and judicial branches reacting through a congressional override of the national ownership cap and a reversal and remand from the Third Circuit in the Prometheus case. By the way, while the court threw out almost all of the Commission's order, it concluded that, quote, reasoned analysis supports the Commission's determination that the blanket ban on newspaper broadcast cross-ownership was no longer in the public interest, end quote. But our story didn't begin in 2002 either. In 2001, the FCC issued a rulemaking focused on the newspaper broadcast cross-ownership ban, a concept that has been around since at least 1975. Comments and reply comments were gathered there, too. That proceeding sprouted up as the result of a June 2000 report from a Democrat-controlled FCC, which found that the ban may not be necessary to protect the public interest in certain circumstances. That report was the result of yet another proceeding, which commenced in 1998. The 1998 proceeding stemmed from a 1996 proceeding, which was sparked by legislation which was engendered by an overwhelming and bipartisan vote of a Republican-controlled Congress and signed into law by a Democrat president. In my 17 years of being in and around the FCC, I cannot think of any issue that has been examined more thoroughly. I can't remember any proceeding where the Commission has solicited as much comment and given the American people as much opportunity to be heard. A point that gets lost in the emotion surrounding this debate is that the directly elected representatives of the American people, the Congress, enacted a statute that contains a presumption in favor of modifying or repealing the ownership rules as competitive circumstances change. Section 202H states that we must review the rules and, quote, determine whether any of such rules are necessary in the public interest as a result of competition. The Commission shall repeal or modify any regulation that it determines to be no longer in the public interest, end quote. This section appears to upend the traditional administrative law principle requiring an affirmative justification for the modification or elimination of a rule. And it is crucial for everyone involved in this debate to recognize this important congressional presumption. It is also important to remember that Section 202H is the most recent set of codified instructions we have from Congress. If Congress passes legislation to the contrary and the President signs it into law, I will work tirelessly to ensure that its intent is carried out. In the meantime, however, Section 202H is our legal mandate. We also have a duty to pursue the noble public policy goals of competition, diversity, and localism. Today's order accomplishes all of the above. However, while the FCC races ahead over a 12-year period like a runaway glacier, as one analyst put it, the private sector has been busy working around the obstacles constructed by the outdated regulations of yore. Is it any wonder that most of the energy, creativity, capital, and growth have been focused on the areas that are less regulated? That's what our record shows. The ironic truth is, in many cases, media consolidation has actually become media divestiture. Companies such as Disney, Citadel, Clear Channel, and Belo actually have been shedding properties to raise capital for new ventures. They are directing new capital investment toward new media ventures. That's where America's eyeballs are looking, so that's where the ad dollars are flowing. The Hollywood writers' strike is all about the concept of following the eyeballs and ad dollars and getting fairly compensated as a result. Just to illustrate the point, over 1/3 of Americans go online to get their news. As the FCC's own research shows, in July 2006, 107 million Americans viewed video online, and about 60% of U.S. Internet users downloaded videos. YouTube alone requires more bandwidth than the entire Internet did in the year 2000. Unregulated new media's numbers are growing. Heavily regulated traditional media's numbers are shrinking. This new media frontier is especially promising for people of color and women. The rise of so-called niche markets is benefiting people who have been underserved in the past. The low barriers to entry and low capital requirements to get started have spawned a plethora of minority and women-oriented new media outlets, such as netnoir.com, a minority-owned online destination that connects people interested in African-American culture and lifestyle, or iVillage.com, which provides daily hot topics for women, or women'senews.com, an online service for news and perspectives of particular concern to women. The exciting news is that all Americans will benefit from this new paradigm because new technology empowers the sovereignty of the individual regardless of who you are. While this new era is in its infancy and we have a long way to go before it matures, I'm optimistic that the media ownership debates of the early 21st century will one day fade into obscurity as technology and competition advance.